Well, ready or not, it's August. I always say when the first day of August rolls around, it's time to get ready for Christmas. It's kind of how it works, right? Well, August is kind of an important month for those of us in Unity. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, our co-founders, were both born during August, which means we often designate August as Unity Heritage Month at our different centers around the country, and certainly here at Unity of Auburn. Gives us an opportunity to review and reflect upon some of our basic core teachings, a chance for us to review for those who have been around for a while, and it's a good introduction for those who might be new to Unity. One of the things that I love about our movement, there they are, Charles and Myrtle. One thing I love about our movement is the way it honors the pioneering work of the Fillmores without turning them into authoritarian guru figures. Because you know, there are a lot of spiritual organizations that become almost, dare I say, cult-like in the way that they treat their founder or their spiritual leader. But the Fillmores, they wanted none of that. They're pretty humble people. And if you ever get a chance to visit Unity Village in Missouri, how many of you have had a chance to go to Unity Village? It's a bit of a stretch getting there from here, but it's worth the trip. And if you go there, I think you'll find a nice balance between a proper respect for our history and also for the work of our founders. There are no shrines to the Fillmores. In fact, and when I first realized this, I thought, how remarkable. Nobody really knows for sure where their final resting place is. It's kind of interesting. I'm sure the information is available and could be gleaned from the public records if someone were really interested in that, but it's not all that important, and in fact it's probably best left a private matter for the immediate family to know things like that. So the great thing about August this year is that we have 5 Sundays, which happens to coincide with our 5 basic Unity principles. The Fillmores did not create these principles. The principles are the work of their great-granddaughter, Connie. She was a Unity minister who was asked to attempt what I would consider to be the daunting task of summarizing our teachings, to be able to put them in a summary form in an article that would appear in the Daily Word magazine. Now, there were some in our movement who reacted negatively. They were afraid that we would end up with a creed or a statement of faith or something like that, which would kind of go against our core values of questioning and embracing change. We're a bunch of free thinkers in Unity, so people don't like the idea of having a set of doctrines that they're required to accept. And that didn't happen. That did not happen. And I find our 5 principles to be a remarkably accurate synopsis of what we're all about. Nobody is ever required to pledge allegiance to them or even to accept them at face value. We don't have a statement of faith like that. We don't have a secret handshake or anything like that. As always, everyone is invited to apply their God-given faculties of critical thinking and question them. And as a result, different Unity centers have tweaked them, as you might imagine, and edited them to be consistent with the experience of their own community and their own experience of what the Fillmores were trying to teach. As we might say, the lyrics are slightly different, but the song seems to remain the same. That's the remarkable thing about it. Now, experience has shown that even though these principles are not presented as a statement of faith, most people won't find a home in Unity if they have significant doubts or objections to the ideas that are contained in these principles. And they can also serve as a useful tool for reflection, for examining our own worldview and what it is that we really hold as our core values. So there's a lot of value here, and so that's why once or twice a year we try to go through them and review them. So these are the principles as restated at Unity of Auburn. Number 1, God is the name that we give to the source and essence of all that is. There is no other enduring power. Number 2, if God is the name we give to the source and essence of all that is, then human beings may properly be called manifestations or expressions of God. Number 3, the way we think directly influences the way we experience the world. Number 4, prayer is creative thinking that changes us, our consciousness, so that we can know and experience what it means to be expressions of God. And number 5, knowing and understanding these principles is not enough. We must live them. So you can see that each principle is a statement, it's an affirmative statement, and I am going to take the somewhat unorthodox position. I mean, what else did you expect, right? I'm taking the somewhat unorthodox position that each one of these statements is actually answering or addressing a basic question that humankind has wrestled with since the beginning of time. And the questions that correspond with our principles are these. Number 1, the nature and necessity of gods. Number 2, what does it mean to be human? Number 3, what is consciousness? Number 4, how do we minimize stress and anxiety and maximize peace of mind? And number 5, how should we live? How then should we live? Now, Unity doesn't claim to have definitive answers to those questions. We have our principles, and we invite the world to join us as we wrestle and play with those questions and those principles on the way to discovering how it is exactly that we're going to co-create a more just, compassionate, and peaceful world together. That's what it's all about. So today we're going to tackle the first principle. God is the name that we give to the source and essence of all that is. There is no other enduring power. This is our attempt to answer the question, what is God, and why do human beings spend so much time talking about it? And as you might imagine, people often ask, do you believe in God? Do we believe in God and unity? I find that to be a very interesting question because you know that a person asking that question, they're coming into the conversation with their own image and idea of God already there, embedded very deeply, and they're assuming that we're all on the same page when they put that word out there, when they say God. They're assuming that everyone shares that same idea. So, when they ask me if I believe in God, I start out by asking them a question in return, and I say, which one? Ooh, huh? All right, time for a surprise test. Time for a surprise test. I got this from Tom Shepard. You know Dr. Tom Shepard, Reverend Dr. Tom Shepard. He teaches theology and religious history at Unity Institute. Now, there's going to be no grade on this quiz. It is strictly for your own enlightenment. And here is the question. Next slide. Here's the question. Are you an atheist? You don't need to write this down. Think about it. 20 seconds. Go. That was almost 20 seconds. I'm sure everybody has their answer. Okay. Now for the grading.
What grading?
Everyone who tried to weasel out with a yes and no answer, you get an F. Although you are probably a born theologian, or a lawyer for that matter. Those of you who said yes, figuring that it was a trick question, that there was some kind of shenanigans going on, you have committed an abomination. Those who said, yeah, you know the old story, right? Yahweh, the God of Israel, is not happy with you if you answered no. And if you read the Bible, then you know that Yahweh don't play. Now, for those of you who denied their atheism, please address your next prayers to Thor, the god of thunder, whose existence you have just acknowledged. Thor, Zoroaster, Jupiter, Apollo, Mars, Poseidon. There have been literally thousands of gods throughout human history, which means that everyone has at least 1,000 gods that they don't believe in. All right. Getting back to the original conversation with the person asking if we believe in God. At this point, they think I'm a little crazy. They roll their eyes and they say something like, well, of course, nobody believes in any of those false gods. I mean the God of the Bible. As if that helps to clarify the issue. And my response, once again, is another question, the same question. Which God? Which God of the Bible? The eyes get a little bit wider. There's a look of shock on their face, but I'm serious. Which God? Is it the God who created everything, called it good? Or is it the God who later decided that creation was bad and utterly corrupt and then tried to destroy it? Is it the same God who said that men must be circumcised, women are unclean, and nobody eats pork? Or is it the son of that God who came along later and said, never mind, pork is fine, women are great, don't worry about the kosher stuff, just turn the other cheek? They can't all be the same. They can't all be the same, but people will twist themselves into logical and rhetorical pretzels trying to argue that there is just one God and one set of rules in the Bible. And actually what we're seeing there is, just like the stories of Zeus and Apollo and the other gods of history, we're seeing fallible human beings who are trying to answer the big questions about the origin of life, the origin of the universe, creation, and answer that all-important question, how should we live? What we see in the Bible and throughout human history is our human tendency to project ourselves out onto the universe. You know, the Bible says that God created humankind in His own image and likeness. Doesn't leave much room for the feminine gender out there, but I think it's actually the opposite. We've created God in our own image and likeness. We project ourselves out onto the universe. We insist that there has to be a supreme human-like being who runs the show. And isn't it interesting the way it works out? Isn't it interesting that wherever it is you happen to be born, God looks just like your people, your tribe. God has all of the same preferences that your group does. The same language, the same food, the same hygiene and cultural preferences. It's amazing how that actually works out. Well, unity takes, as you might guess, a slightly different approach. And going all the way back to the late 1800s, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore hired an author by the name of Emily Cady, whose full name is actually Harriet Emily Cady. And those of you who have been around for a while have probably read her book, Lessons in Truth. And she was hired to write a series of articles for the predecessor of Unity magazine, which was then turned into this book called Lessons in Truth. And she talks about a totally different way of trying to answer the big questions. And when it comes to God, this is what she wrote. She starts out by saying that broader and more learned minds are always cramped by the thought of God as a person. For personality limits to time and place, to place and time. She says, God is the name we give to that unchangeable, inexorable principle at the source of all existence. God is the underlying substance of all things. God as principle is unchanging and does remain forever uncognizant and unmoved by the changing things of time and sense. Many have thought of God as a personal being. The statement that God is principle chills them, and in terror they cry out. In terror they cry out, she says. Now you might think she's being a little overly dramatic, but I can tell you that in my experience, this idea of God as principle does meet with resistance, even from people who have been in unity for a long time. Emily Cady knew that way back when, and it still happens today. As you might imagine, God as principle has some serious and far-reaching ramifications for how we relate to the universe, and especially how we relate to each other. I think there's nothing more personal. There's nothing more personal than the way the universe shows up as each one of us. And it does that based on a set of natural laws that human beings can discover and understand by right of this thing that we call consciousness. What a gift. There's nothing more personal than that. Now, we're not saying that we know everything about those natural laws or that we will ever know everything. But the great thing about principle is that it holds true for all people everywhere. It doesn't carve out exceptions for certain groups based on local customs and ethnic preferences. In other words, principle unites rather than divides. That can be a bit of a challenge. One source, one power, one essence, one set of rules for everyone, or as we sometimes say, one presence, one power, expressing as the universe and as life itself. So here's a big question. What might happen when we start our own personal search for truth from that perspective? One presence and one power expressing as the universe and life itself. What might happen if we try to view the ever-changing circumstances of life through the lens of one presence and one power? If we consciously and intentionally use that as our starting point, would it still be possible to marginalize and oppress another human being based on things like skin color, or their beliefs, or their ideology, or because of the ethnic group that they happen to belong to? That's the challenge for us. God as principle, one presence and one power, does not allow for those kind of exceptions. One presence and one power acknowledges the ultimate unity of all things and all people, even in the face of the diversity and constant change that we see around us. And again, it doesn't get more personal than that, but we have to shift the way that we think about it. So next week we're going to go deeper into this idea, because we're going to be tackling the second principle, and we're going to get into the question of what does it mean to be human. In other words, what does it mean to be human in relationship to this idea of one presence and one power? So dance and wrestle with the question for the week, and come on back next time and I'll give you some more questions to wrestle with. We'll see you then.